Hey everyone! So today we are focusing on, I've picked up my notebook, like I'm about to read my notebook to you. It's fine. You can't get away from my weirdness even if we're not physically in the same room together. I feel like I've told you that already. So today we're focusing on the G. Thomas Goodnight article, The Personal, Technical, and Public Spheres of Argument, a speculative inquiry into the art of public deliberation. That was just I've been talking a lot cough, not I'm dying from the coronavirus talk cough. Whatever, words, it's fine. So, so we're just gonna jump in and I'm gonna try and help you all think about what to pull from this article, how to read the article, and some helpful tips for kind of using this article to kind of study and build our vocabulary for rhetoric and argumentation, again, together. So let's just go ahead and jump right in. One of the things that I really love about this article is not only that it's such a well-written article, but that Dr. Goodnight wrote this article in 1982, around the time that, so for those of you who have ever kind of taken a publics or a philosophy class, the person that you might have been familiar with is Jürgen Habermas and his notion of the public sphere. And these gets written before Dr. Goodnight ever actually read the Habermas piece on it. And so he is taking a very different approach, but a very connected approach to how we see, think, and interact with the idea of what a public is and what different spheres look like when we think about it from the aspect of argumentation and people engaging specifically in deliberative arguments. So what do we mean by that? So I want to take us first into where Goodnight is going with argumentation and arguments and rhetoric more broadly, and then we will jump into the three spheres, the personal, technical, and public spheres of argument. And then after that's done, I'm going to kind of task you with engaging on a journey of unpacking the news articles, social media posts, and bits of deliberation that have been happening around COVID-19 and the coronavirus to see how these different spheres of argument overlap and interact with each other and the way in which we kind of decide what is or isn't worthwhile to consider from those perspectives. So first jumping in, I want us to think about rhetoric because very early and in the first couple of paragraphs and pages of this article, Goodnight is doing a couple of things. The first is he is offering us his own definition of rhetoric. So I read this from the 2012 reprinting of his article that was put into Argumentation and Advocacy, which is I think I'm just going to go ahead and upload this to iCollege for you all so that we are all on the same page. So on page 198, Goodnight says that rhetoric is an art, a human enterprise engaging individual choice and common activity, and that deliberative rhetoric is a form of argumentation through which citizens test and create social knowledge in order to uncover, assess, and resolve shared problems. So this becomes particularly powerful because Goodnight is making a connection between rhetoric and argumentation, and he's taking these kind of bigger abstract definitions of argumentation that we've been dealing with so far throughout the semester, and he's bringing it down and he's paring it down and he's using specific terms and specific language to do that. because he then goes on to make a very important distinction between what is deliberative rhetoric or deliberative architecture. And I think that these are very powerful definitions, and very helpful definitions to get us to think about we are having conversations about community, about the common good, about what the common good should look like, and the way in which different aspects of our life, whether it be what is confined in the realm of somebody's home and what should be one's personal space, to these very intense communities like this journal that he's publishing the article in that demands particularities of language that get very idiosyncratic or very specific to that group, and are only interesting and important insofar as it matters to those groups. So if you've taken science classes and math classes and you've had to read journal articles and studies that get published from those groups, I have a friend of mine who works for a pharmaceutical research company, and I went to visit her once, and I was having this conversation with one of her coworkers about how he was reviewing articles for a journal for pharmaceutical chemistry, and it was this big, long, intense discussion about functions of validity, and he was criticizing this article that he was looking at and that he was deciding whether or not it could get published based on how you standardize and value validity and whether or not the tables that get used to construct and interpret and engage with data is good, helpful, or important, as well as other articles that are very much just interested in what happens when a sample that you are attempting to analyze, so like a biological sample, spoils, and so, or something happens to it and it gets corrupted, and so now you only have a small piece of data that you can analyze. Is that still enough to make these big, broad claims, which are conversations that people in scientific communities care a lot about, but your general public doesn't care that much about. And so we want to think about argument and argumentation and the goal and the purpose of analyzing and making distinctions between public argument and deliberative argument, and why public and deliberative argument is so important is because we are constantly thinking about the public good and about public policy, right? So in the current kind of moment and climate that we're living in, we have been following in detail for many of us, whether it's a coping mechanism or a part of personal neuroses, everything that's been happening with these economic relief packages that Congress has been debating, right? And so we're engaged in public argument every time we have a conversation about those relief packages and what it can and cannot do for our future, and whether or not $1,200 direct payments is good, bad, enough, too much, not enough, whatever, right? And who is the good that we want to benefit, and who are the people that need to be taken care of, need to and want to think about how do you unpack and how do you analyze and how do you figure out when and if everything is falling apart. So from that, Goodnight makes 3 propositions. His first is that you have to think about why, right? So what is, and I think I've asked this question to you all, right? Like I asked you at the very beginning of the semester, what is something worth arguing for, and why do we argue? For arguments to happen, and arguments produce new uncertainties while attempting to resolve other uncertainties. The second proposition that he has for us is that each argument engages with or is responsive to a technical, public, or personal sphere. So we'll unpack those three spheres in just a moment, but I want to be clear that when he says that, he does not see those spheres as discrete, right? So it's not like, that's my nice notebook. So it's not like we have public, personal, technical, and there are these like clear, discrete boundaries happening. But in fact, right, it's maybe more like this. What is it? It's more like a three-part Venn diagram where some things cover all of these and become great issues of public good. And sometimes there are things that are discretely in one of our three spheres. But that he has this big concern, right? And that concern is that what's happening is, so we've got our little public sphere over here. What's happening is that our technical and our personal sphere styles, expectations for argument are eroding and making what is public deliberation kind of disappear. Because we're using standards of evidence and we are using expectations of those spheres to deny people access to engagement or to write off some of our understandings. So if you think about this, for me, I tend to think about it from the perspective of this idea around fake news and post-truth and these kinds of knowledges, where everything that is just kind of like gut feeling, I want to believe that it's the standards of memory, personal experience, and everything else that kind of happens internally becomes the referendum or the means by which we make decisions about the rest of the world and about the public and what is true and what is not true and what is good and what is not good, is this kind of overwhelming notion that the standards for engagement for a personal one-on-one argument that only matters to you and me and has no broader public implications can disguise itself. It can kind of dress up as a public argument. And it can dress up as speaking to the needs of the good of the public. And that gets kind of complicated. But we'll get into that a little bit more. So the last thing is that the personal and technical spheres are eroding the public through imitations of deliberative discourse. So that's kind of what I'm talking about with that last little piece, right? They're dressing up. They have put their, I was looking to see if I had a hat. They're putting their hats on to say, we are the public. We are public argumentation. And you don't understand what we're saying or why we're correct because you're too stupid, basically. Even though, recommendation for you all, as you're going through and kind of reading this article and trying to figure that out, because I think it's important. And what I did is I create a little chart. And this chart helps me make distinctions between how the personal, technical, and public spheres differ in terms of standards of evidence, how they differ in terms of the informal and formal expectations, and they differ in terms of who is impacted by the arguments that are happening in those spaces. So my recommendation is that you do that. And I would love to kind of see how that unfolds for all of you, and how you take that. For you to start kind of getting 15 or so minutes is enough to kind of help guide you in reading this article a little bit better and understanding some of the implications of this article. And as I move forward, maybe some of the anecdotes that make these videos go a little bit longer will get smaller as I figure out teaching online together with all of you. So that's where I'm going to end this one for you today. And hopefully, this is helpful in guiding and thinking about this article. And we can have some discussions. So if you have questions about the article, if there are pieces of it that you don't understand, and you're trying to unpack it, my last couple of recommendations is to first create a little chart and try and fit pieces into that chart, and then remember that an argument overlaps with those. And then the second request I'm going to have for you is to find an argument being made around or about the coronavirus, whether it is an argument dealing with social distancing, whether it is an argument dealing with isolation, quarantine, economic relief, the role of government, whatever it might be. Work. Find somebody who is making an argument and work through how it functions and interacts with some of the spheres of arguments. Is it entirely in one? Is it mixing a couple of them? And what does that argument look like? And why does that matter? How do evidence standards change based on which of the spheres this argument is primarily trying to engage with? Through this from that perspective, and I'll see you for the next one.